everybody. Welcome to another month of Wild Suncatchers. Today I'm here at Blue Hill Mountain with the lovely St. Joneswort, which is our plant of the month for July. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about its history and folklore, and then Claire will also share something, and we have a guest, Brighid Doherty, who will also be sharing more of its medicinal qualities and identification of the plant. So St. Joneswort, its common name is common St. Joneswort. Its scientific name is Hypericum perforatum. And Hypericum is a Greek word that actually means over the apparition. And it refers to a belief that people once had that if you hang a sprig of St. Joneswort over a person's head, it helps ward off harmful spirits. Perforatum is the species name, and species names often describe a characteristic of the plant to help you identify it. So perforatum refers to tiny pricks in the leaf of the St. Joneswort. If you hold it up to the sun, you can see tons of little white dots, and they aren't holes, even though they look like holes. It looks like there's a perforation. I think they're glands, but that's a way to identify this plant. So St. Joneswort has been called St. Joneswort since about the medieval ages. And prior to that, it was called the solstice herb. And herb actually translates to meaning, or wort translates to meaning herb in Old English. And it was called the solstice herb because the indigenous people of Europe used it as a healing herb right around the time of the summer solstice, and that's when it would bloom in Europe and in the British Isles, and that's when they would gather it for their ceremonies and for their healing practices. And then during the medieval ages, when the church was trying to kind of extinguish a lot of the pagan traditions, they realized they couldn't because these traditions were so steeped in the land and in the people, but they decided to try and change the name and make it a little bit more Christian. And so they tried to change the name of the summer solstice to St. John's Day, and St. John was supposedly beheaded on June 24th, and so they kind of like tried to make this the celebration of celebrating St. John. And because St. Joneswort was once called the solstice herb, they also changed the name of the plant to St. Joneswort. Another interesting thing about the name of this plant, in German folklore, it's called fairy blood, and it refers to this amazing red-purple oil in the plant. And so if you take the bud, and sometimes the flower as well, and squeeze it, it will turn your fingertips purple. And I'm going to show you what happens if you steep the flowers and the buds in 100 proof or 80 proof vodka. It turns into this beautiful red tincture, which is very reminiscent of that name, fairy blood. So, another part of our history with this plant that's a little bit more on the darker side is that during the burning times, otherwise known as the witch trials in Europe, this plant used to be stuffed into the mouths of the women who were proclaimed witches by the church to try and force them to confess. They believed that it would force them to confess. And I think it's a really interesting and important piece of history because the women of these European communities were the healers, and they used these plants to heal their families and communities. And then when the church came in and proclaimed them witches and to be bad people, they turned the plants that they loved and used in their lives against them as well. And so a very hard part of our history, but I think an important little bit of our history to remember as well. On a lighter note, these plants show up in all sorts of folklore across Europe as well. In the Alps, it is said that if you want to ward off thunder from coming into your home and around your home, you can put the St. Joneswort flower on top of a hot stove. It's also said that if you put the St. Joneswort flower between two wheels of cheese, it will prevent the worms from coming in as the cheese is aging and where it's being stored. In Wales, the Welsh people used to believe, or maybe still do, that if you take a sprig of the St. Joneswort and give it to every member of your family, and every member hangs it in the rafters and leaves it overnight, that the way it has shriveled, or to what degree it has shriveled overnight, will tell you how long you have to live. Also, on the Isle of Wight, there are some really interesting stories about St. Joneswort, and one of them is if you step on St. Joneswort as you're walking through the field, that a fairy horse will appear and take you off to the fairy realms, and you might never return. So St. Joneswort has been with us and been interacting with humans for thousands and thousands of years. It is native to Europe, but has naturalized here in the US and blooms a little bit later than summer solstice here. So I'm just going to check to see if there's anything else I wanted to share with you. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of our video.
Hi, I'm Brighid Doherty of the Solidago School of Herbalism here on Deer Isle, Maine. Today we're going to be talking about St. Joneswort, otherwise known as St. Joneswort. The botanical name is Hypericum perforatum. One of the main identifying characteristics of St. Joneswort is the perforations on the leaf, hence the name Hypericum perforatum. So all you need to do is pick a small leaf and then hold it up to the light, and you'll see little, almost looking like little pinholes that light is shining through. There are lots of different species of Hypericum, but this is what's known as the most medicinal. Why is it medicinal? What does it do to help us? Well, I like to use St. Joneswort both internally and externally. So internally, I will make a tincture, which is an alcohol extract, and then take it internally. It's a great antiviral for a broad spectrum of viruses. It also helps ease muscle aches and pains, or even sciatica pain. And I think one of its largest calls to fame is that people think of it to help ease mild depression. And then topically, I infuse the flowers in olive oil, and I use it as a sunblock. So olive oil itself is sun protective, but the flavonoids in Hypericum, the yellow color and the red color that's extracted from it, are very protective for our skin. And then if I were to get a sunburn, because I forgot to put it on, I can put it on after to help heal the sunburn. And then also use it as a muscle rub to help with the sore muscles if you've been working out in the garden for too long and your muscles are really sore. Also along those lines, I forgot to mention one other thing, is that it's excellent for healing nerve damage or painful nerves. So whereas it's an antiviral and also specific for nerve repair, for instance, if you have shingles, which is caused by a virus in the nerves, it would be a perfect remedy for that, both internal and external. So today I want to demonstrate making a tincture of the St. Joneswort, and it's the flowers that are used ideally. Some people will make a tincture, especially if they don't have a lot of St. Joneswort plants around them, by using the aerial tops. So they'll cut the plant, at the base of where it's flowering, and then they'll use the stem, the leaves, and all the flowers, and put that in a jar to make your tincture. However, the best quality, and if you have the amount of St. Joneswort to spare, would be just from the ripe flowers. You can also do the flowering tops, so like the flower buds, the ripe flowers, and the past flowers, which makes for easier harvesting. I prefer to do that because it allows the population to grow, because if you just chop the whole flowering top of the plant, it won't produce any seeds for future generations. So where you just are harvesting the flowers, you can allow some of the flowers to go by and to go to seed, and then definitely even leave like a whole part of the plant untouched to go to seed. It's a short-lived perennial. It might live for 2 to 5 years, but and you'll find it'll kind of move around your garden space if you allow it to grow. But it's definitely a plant that you want to allow to go to seed to keep the populations healthy. When you're harvesting the St. Joneswort, you might also notice that there are some beetles that are attracted to this plant. And the beetles are actually specific to Hypericum species, and actually there's one here. They are bronze-ish in color. I don't know if you can see that. They also might have like a metallic green color to them. And those are no good. They actually will eat the flowers and the flower buds. And then they can actually also haphazardly end up in your tincture making if you're not careful. Apparently, a lot of people at one point, or maybe still do, consider Hypericum plants, especially Hypericum perforatum, to be an invasive species. And in New Zealand, they definitely feel that way, or whoever the governing bodies feel that way. And then even in California, I think especially. And so what these governments did is they imported this beetle specifically from Asia, I believe it's native to help to control the Hypericum populations. So the beetles like to eat the buds and the flowers, and that will not allow the Hypericum to produce seeds. And I have been noticing them more and more this year than in past years. They seem to be more prevalent. So anytime you're wild foraging a plant, you really want to also think about what other assaults it may be facing. I mean, if I were to just go through my yard and pick off all the flowering tops of all of my Hypericum, plus then there'd be the beetle also picking the flowering tops of the plant, the population of Hypericum would dwindle quite quickly. So it's always good to really pay attention to your population and to also, you know, be aware of the health of the population. So what I'm doing to make the tincture is I'm basically just plucking the fresh flowers from the day, as well as some buds. If you actually look at the buds really closely, you'll see these dark lines that run up them they look black, but they're actually a red oil. And that's going to have some of the main active constituents to it. And you'll see that red oil will extract, you'll see quite quickly when we make the tincture. And it will extract a lot slower in your infused oil. But you know that you have a really nice, potent remedy once it turns a deep red, like almost a blood red color. Okay, so here I have my jar lightly packed. You want to put as much as you can fit in there so you have a nice potent remedy. Okay, and then when I make tinctures, I always use 100 proof vodka, and it's usually what I can find at my local grocery store, so it might be a relatively cheap brand, but you know, vodka is just a distilled product, so it's actually quite pure unto itself. Okay, and then we're just gonna cover the flower with the vodka. Now, if I was making an infused oil, it would be the same exact process, but I'd be covering the plant with olive oil. And with Hypericum, this has to be done with the fresh flowers. The dried flowers, that active property, that red oil, is no longer available. And then you basically will let your tincture sit on your counter out of the sunlight for 6 weeks, and then you can strain it out through a fabric cloth to strain it and squeeze out all of the tincture from the plant material, and you'll have this gorgeous red tincture. And usually, especially with the alcohol extracts, this will turn red quite quickly within 5 to 10 minutes. It's like a little magic trick. So as you're driving around, you'll notice on the sides of the road, Hypericum will be growing in open, sunny fields. You'll see a lot of Hypericum, and also as a garden weed. And I always just like to let it grow and pick my patches and keep an eye on them and tend them. And harvest sparingly, but always have enough to get me through a year of hypericum tincture and hypericum infused oil.
Hi everyone, welcome to Wild Suncatchers. I'm Claire, the Youth Services Librarian at the Blue Hill Library, and today we're talking about St. Joneswort. So I'm currently sitting across from the library. I had been looking for St. Joneswort as I moved around on the peninsula and ended up finding a whole bunch right across the street from the library. So lucky to have found it. And so today we are going to be pressing St. Joneswort flowers. So the first thing you're going to need is to find some St. Joneswort. And once you have it, we are going to use paper towels, newspaper, to help absorb the moisture from the flowers as they're drying. And so you can make kind of a sandwich with paper towel, then the flower, and then another paper towel sheet on top. And if you want extra absorbency, you can stick newspaper on both sides too. And then you can stick the whole packet in a book or in between books and stack a bunch of books on top. And it typically is good to let them dry for 2 weeks. It kind of depends on the flower and the climate. It's pretty moist here in Maine currently, being summer and very humid. So it's good to leave them for a little bit before you check on them, even though it's hard to wait sometimes to see what they look like. So here are some that I pressed, so they're very flat, as you can see. This one's starting to bend, but one cool thing you can do with them once you've pressed them is mount them onto a piece of paper or in, say, your nature journal. And so you could make a card, and you could even label the plants that you collect. You can do this with a lot of different plants. You could press and preserve really anything. So give that a try. And for mounting the plant, you'll want to pick the side that you want to be showing, and then you'll flip it over and you'll put glue on the other side and then stick that onto the paper. And I just kind of patted them down to make sure that the plant and the glue and the paper were all touching. And that's really it. You just gotta let it dry after that. So I encourage you to try this out with St. Joneswort and try out other plants too, see what happens. I wanted to add one more thing about St. Joneswort. As you experiment potentially with tinctures and infused oils, every body is different. So if you find that your skin actually becomes more sensitive when you use an infused St. Joneswort oil, then you shouldn't continue to use it. And same with a tincture. If you're wanting to try using a tincture, if you are already taking prescription drugs for anxiety or for stress, it would be a great idea to check with a healthcare provider before you start taking a tincture for anxiety, because that could decrease the strength of the prescription drugs. So good to check. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we are so excited to study another plant with you in August. Thanks for joining us.